Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. It is our great honor to welcome back to the OPT Network none other than Ambassador Andrew Young. Ambassador Young, good morning and welcome back.
Good morning and good to see you again.
It's good to see you too. You know, you have a wealth of accomplishments. You've been on this journey for equality literally your whole life.
That's really true.
I mean, it's really true. And I thought, who better to talk about all of the movements and where we are on this journey than you? Because you've seen it all. Go ahead.
You know, because this is Black History Month, I've been talking to people all over the country 3-4 times a day. And one, I get tired of saying the same thing. But the other is that it makes me think. And suddenly I started looking around Atlanta and seeing new things that I hadn't seen before. And so I really feel like we are over the hump. And that, it started with the number of Black women in and around Atlanta that are starting their own businesses. I mean, there's been a boom in business development amongst women, and a few men, but it's mostly young women. And but then there's, because in Atlanta, for instance, when we had the Olympics, we raised $2.5 billion. And 40% of that went to minority business. Now, those were mostly Black men. But what we're seeing now, that was 20 years ago, but those Black men made one hell of a lot of money. Well, since Maynard Jackson in 1973 as mayor, 25% of all the business in the city has gone to minorities. And when I came in 1982, I raised it to 40%. And so there's been a lot of money flowing through this community. It has also grown from about 500,000 people to now above 6 million people. So we've had explosive growth, and the Black community's growth has pretty much kept up with the white community's growth. So that nobody expected us to win the last election. They didn't realize all the people that have moved in here and registered to vote and are economically and politically active. Now, so that a number of these young men, well, one of the young men I talked about in church Sunday was one of our church members who, there was an article about him as being the leading venture capitalist, as an angel investor, helping people start up businesses. And there must be 10, 15, 20 businesses that over the years he has worked with and invested in, and now they're beginning to take off. Now, everybody was hurt by the virus.
Right.
And by our closing down, but it seemed like it gave some people a chance to retool and refocus their businesses. As we come out of it, it looked good. And so what I think that Black Lives Matter did for us, and it did for everybody, Black and white, it woke us up to the fact that we are in the third phase of Martin Luther King's dream. He talked about redeeming the soul of America from the triple evils of race, war, and poverty. And I think that Black Lives Matter, though we didn't talk about it that much, it focused the nation on the poverty question. In fact, it was Citicorp Bank in New York that did a study that said discrimination cost the economy $16 trillion.
Wow.
That if they had paid black folk fairly, paid women fairly, we would be $16 trillion richer. So all of a sudden, we're realizing that, and Dr. King told this to the businessmen in Birmingham way back in 1963. He said, look, you can't keep us down in the gutter without keeping one foot in the gutter with us.
Wow.
And said, really, we're not trying to do anything to take you down or trade places with you. We're just saying we need a new relationship. We need to both stand up facing each other as brothers. And we can both grow together. Now, we've seen that happen in Atlanta. We've seen that happen in Birmingham. We've seen it happen in New Orleans and Houston. I don't know about Alexandria. I have always been interested in that part of the world because I grew up in New Orleans, and my daddy is from Franklin, Louisiana.
Right.
And all my childhood, he had a dental trailer traveling around the state, fixing people's teeth for free. And I was a little boy traveling with him, so I can remember my visits up and down the river.
So
And,
let me ask you this, Ambassador Young, as you look back on your history with Dr. King and the movement, and then you fast forward to Black Lives Matter movement and to the deaths of so many Black and brown boys and men. This particular movement that we just saw, how did it make you feel when you saw so many people, not just Black people, a part of this movement, but a hue of the nation?
It made me feel good because, see, you all this generation talks about all of the Black people killed, but before we went to Birmingham in 1963, there were 62 Black homes that were bombed in 1961 and 62. Fred Shuttlesworth's church was bombed 3 times. See? So,
so this was not a new thing to you. This was nothing new.
The new thing about it was that because of people like you telling the story, remember, we didn't have any Black radio stations. We didn't have any Black-owned radio stations. And even the Black disc jockeys could not make public service announcements about our mass meetings. And it's a different world now. I think I saw George Floyd killed, but they saw it down in New Zealand. They saw it all over Europe and Africa. Within 10 hours, the whole world was involved. And it made America look very, very bad. And people, for the most part, stepped forward. Now, if we had this present president now, that would have been a crisis moment that he could have taken advantage of to move things further. That's what President Lyndon Johnson did after the Selma Bridge on the Selma to Montgomery March. It was a tragic event, but at least nobody was killed on that march. There were people killed before and after. But Lyndon Johnson went straight to the Congress, and we got a voting rights bill out of that. I think that's what President Biden would have done if it had been on his watch that something like that happened. I see an awakening of the conscience of America. I was talking about the Super Bowl. Now, I don't. I have never been a Tom Brady fan. You know, but Tom Brady did what he had to do, and he reached out and he got a young black wide receiver that nobody wanted to touch.
Mm-hmm.
And Antonio Brown, everybody knew he was a good football player, but they talked about his attitude and this, that, and the other. Tom Brady said, I don't care about that. I want him on my team, and he can live at my house, and I will treat him like my little brother, and I'll see that he stays straight.
Mm-hmm. Well,
he caught 2 touchdown passes, and that's why Tom Brady's got his 7th Super Bowl.
Right.
Now, I think that's a message. You right down there at LSU.
That's right.
And just think, if LSU were deprived of black talent, it would not exist.
That's right.
it would be nobody. See? Well, I think the world is waking up to that. The world is waking up to the fact that we have got to live and work together as brothers and sisters, or as Martin Luther King said, we will perish together as fools.
Wow.
I think for the first time in my life, and I've been here a long time, I think the majority of Americans and the majority of people around the world are suddenly realizing that.
You know, as I was thinking about our conversation and all that you have given your life to service and all that you've seen and continue to see, but with all of those accomplishments, being a man of God and understanding God's word. And so I wonder how people come together in that vein that you and Dr. King understood, that if we don't come together, we'll perish together. How does that now happen? Because there's been such us against them.
Well, I think that cities that are growing and prospering have sort of overcome that. I'm trying to think of an illustration of what I'm talking about. But in Atlanta, even before we had black mayors, the business community understood that racial bigotry was bad for business. And they put up $4 million in 1960, before the sit-ins, to say Atlanta was a city too busy to hate. Now, the truth of it is we were just like New Orleans and Houston and everybody else. But the people with the money said, no, we don't want to be like that. And it was largely that Coca-Cola was a global company. And the president of Coca-Cola that came back in the 60s had been in South Africa. And he saw what apartheid did to the South African economy. And he didn't want that to happen in the Atlanta economy. And so they put up their money and they got to work with us. Mm-hmm. The answer is working together.
And so when you look at where we are now and the power of somebody like Stacey Abrams, talk about what that did to your heart, to see how she took a movement that was grassroots, came out of herself for the greater good.
Well, there's no question that she changed the nation.
She did.
And she organized it. She raised the money to do it. But it really is the same kind of thing we've been doing in Georgia and Louisiana all along, except we didn't have the big money. It is, God has a sense of humor. And if the same folk who don't like black people don't like Jews,
wow,
quite often. Mm-hmm. And I really think that Stacey Abrams had 2 really great young candidates. John Ossoff is Jewish, but he never could have gotten elected by himself, I don't think. But Raphael Warnock is black. He's the eighth of the 11 children growing up in a housing project in Savannah, but he worked his way through Morehouse and got a PhD. And he's a brilliant, wonderful young man. Now, he rallied the masses of folk, black and white. I say that coalition, that Black Jewish coalition in Atlanta, meant that a lot of money came in too. Now, when it came down to the control of the Congress was determined by that election. And because both of them won, it's 50-50 in the Senate, and Kamala Harris breaks the tie.
Right.
I think the Lord has a good sense of humor. But it required the hard work. My daughter works with the American Civil Liberties Union, and my granddaughter was complaining about not getting paid enough, and she was saying, look, if we had not had 50,000 volunteers, we wouldn't have won that election.
50,000.
At least. See, we had 150,000 that when we put on the Olympics. And one thing about Atlanta is people will give you their spare time. And they are devoted to making things better there. And I think that's because you got 5 HBCUs that are 150 years old. And so that is a spirit of giving and a spirit of contributing to the society. And then Georgia Tech and Georgia State,
right?
They have blossomed. I in this morning's paper, one of the basketball players at Georgia State, at Georgia Tech, graduates, and he's on his way back to Nigeria to coach the Nigerian Olympic basketball team.
Wow.
See, and so we have a worldwide cycle going. Now, just like we can follow it in sports, but the same sort of movement of ideas and money is happening in the economy. And a group of, I call them kids because they were 15 when I was mayor. They're talking about Greenwood Bank. And it's not a bank in the traditional sense, but it's a financial technology bank that will be worked with cell phones, credit cards, and no buildings.
Wow. And
there's a group of young men and women, several of them have PhDs from Georgia Tech in cyber security. And they've been working with the major banks around the world, and they're all in their 40s. See, and one of them, Killer Mike, was a rapper who made a lot of money.
Killer Mike.
I was reminding him that he was the president of the Mayor's Youth Council when I was mayor in the 80s. And he was talking about, I was saying that I worked for 8 years as mayor and didn't get a pension, didn't have, I was making $50,000 a year, see, for 8 years, see, and when I left, nobody offered me a job for a long time, see, and he said under his breath, "Damn, I said, what do you mean? He said, my wife made me turn down a gig for that much money because she didn't want me traveling during. And in one night, he was going to make what it took me
Wow.
8 years to make.
Wow.
And he was able to turn it down. See?
That speaks volumes from where we've come. And so before we've got to let you go, Ambassador Young, you've seen so much. You're still here, still vibrant, still telling the story, still giving us really history on this journey. Did you ever think in your lifetime, out of all you've seen and done, that you would live to see a Black president and that you would live to see Vice President Kamala Harris, a Black woman, become vice president?
Well, you know, I admire that. And that was really significant and important. I wasn't focused on a Black president and a vice president.
Okay.
Because what I was focused on was the Black people who were behind Lyndon Johnson. See, and there were Black people all over the White House when Jimmy Carter was president. See, and they were people who came straight out of the movement. See, and they knew why they were there. And the same thing with Bill Clinton. See, we have, well, and I'm not talking about, I'm not being critical of President Obama, but as mayor of Atlanta, I couldn't do anything that the Black community didn't make me do. The mayor doesn't have the power. The president doesn't have the power. And we have a tendency, we never picketed President Obama. And I'm glad. But the first day I was mayor, all of my boys from SCLC that I had trained, I hadn't been in the city hall 2 hours after swearing in. And they had a demonstration, 300-400 people outside.
Wow.
I'll tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. And I went out and I said, what the hell? I said, what the hell is the matter with you? Why you all want to mess with me? They say, we know, we want to keep you. We don't want you to get in there and forget us.
They wanted to hold you accountable.
Yeah, I realized that was the best thing that they could have done for me. The more hell they raised with me, the more I could get done. And so I went out with the picket line and got them in a circle, and we sang "We Shall Overcome Together."
That's awesome.
See, it's very hard. Now there's a very good well, your congressman from New Orleans, Richmond.
Okay.
He's the president's one of the closest advisors. And there are, I mean, the White House is overrun with smart Black women. And so, but I went to Congress. I went to Congress in 1972. And Joe Biden went to the Senate in the same year.
Wow.
So I have known him since 1972. And we couldn't find a guy with a better heart and a better head and more experience in a wider variety of areas. He has suffered himself. He has worked hard. He knows the problems. I think if we can keep him with the support that he needs in the Congress and the Senate, because see, power is very temporary in the United States. And the past president thought he could be president forever, but it came a time when it stopped. and it was stopped legally and honorably. And today, the Supreme Court said that he has to release his taxes reports from before he was president. See, and there is a day of judgment, and there is a time when you have to pay for your sins. But
Yes.
there's also a time that we can make dreams come true, and that's what I'm looking for. But now we've got some real problems, and you have them. You're the center of those problems. I've been saying since Katrina, we've got to do something about the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River has been flooding since I was a little boy, and they built those levees with the CCC camps. See, in the 30s, and there is a bill going to Congress now that I hope would put some money available to upgrade infrastructure of the Mississippi River, because it hadn't been done. See, I was born in 1932, and the river was first done under Franklin Roosevelt in 1936. It was supposed to last 50 years. It's been 80 years.
Wow.
See, and the storms are getting bigger. You know, we did not take God's world seriously. And so you have what's happening in Texas now.
Right.
I mean, that kind of, everything we have, all of the natural disasters are likely to be bigger and more dangerous, and until we realize that this is my father's world. I think the last president thought it was his world and he could make the laws, but the law of gravity is going to work. These little viruses that are crawling around all over the world, God created them too. And I was very, very proud to learn that one of the reasons why when I got my vaccine.
I was going to ask you if you had gotten your vaccine. You did
Yeah,
get it.
I got both of them.
You got both of them.
But I was thrilled because I was reading about the vaccine, and there was a young lady named Kismekia Colbert. And I said, what kind of nationality is that? And then I realized.
I read that article too.
I said, that's one of them black mama made names. I said, she must be a sister. Come to find out that she was picked out of elementary school. She's from a big family, and she was picked in elementary school and put in advanced studies, and all through high school and college. And when she finished college, she got a grant to do PhD studies at University of North Carolina. And she chose to go to Sri Lanka, which is the southern part of India, and study tropical viruses. So she had 6 years of study before this virus came about, and she wasn't but 34. See, so that when they were looking for somebody who was an expert, they had to put her in charge of that Moderna virus. And I said, the Lord works in mysterious ways.
Yes, he does. Could you have ever imagined when you were a boy growing up in Louisiana and New Orleans and here, these parts, that God would task you with such greatness? Could you have ever, did you know somewhere that
Well, you know what I knew? I always knew I was blessed. My grandmama was blind, and I used to have to read newspaper and the Bible to her every day. And she'd tell me almost every day, son, you blessed. And the Lord has blessed you. To them to whom much has been given, of them is much required. And so I heard that over and over again. See? And I heard that all things work together for good for them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. And I sort of realized after I graduated from Howard University, and I just barely got out. If I made one more D, I'd have flunked out instead of graduating. And I came out of college knowing that I didn't know anything, but realizing that I was blessed. And I decided that from now on, I'm going to just go where the Spirit says go. And I had no ambition. I didn't want to be any mayor. I didn't think anything about politics. And I started down in Thomasville and Beachton, Georgia, and Marion, Alabama, where the Selma Montgomery March started originally. And those little country churches sort of gave me my baptism.
How did you learn obedience so early on? You said, I'm going to go where God tells me to go and do what he says to do. How did that obedience?
Well, because I was blessed. I knew I was blessed. See, and I drove around Louisiana with my daddy, and I knew poverty. See, and I knew that I had messed up in college. I mean, I was in college. I was interested in sports, fraternities, girls, and if there was any time left over, I studied a little bit to try to get through the next exam. But I knew when I graduated, I had this paper, and I said, "This doesn't mean a damn thing because I don't know a damn thing." But I said, God couldn't have given me these kinds of blessings for nothing.
Wow.
Okay? And so from now on, I'm going to do one day at a time what the Spirit says do. And that's sort of what has happened. I didn't want to, I had a job in New York, and I was even making films, had a TV program when I was 26. And Martin Luther King said he needed somebody down there. And I'd married this little girl from Marion, Alabama. And she said, "I'm tired of New York. We need to go back home." And so we sold our house, quit my job, and we went back and started all over with Martin Luther King.
Wow.
And have never regretted it one day.
And so when this life is over and God says, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant," because you've given your life to God and to the service of humanity.
But you made a mistake.
What?
Now
What?
You said this when this life is over. Now maybe this life may seem to be over, but that's one thing. My grandmama was blind, and she was in her 80s, and she used to pray every day for the Lord to take her home.
Did she?
Because she knew there was life beyond
this.
Yeah, and I know that all the things that we're doing in Atlanta and stuff, the ideas that come to us, they come from not only my grandmama, but Martin Luther King didn't die.
No, he didn't die.
They talk about who killed Martin Luther King. Nobody. Because he's just as alive today.
Probably
he's more influential today than he was in 1968. See? And all they did was they shut down his body and they turned his spirit loose all over the world. And so I've been to 140 countries.
Wow.
And I've never been any place where people didn't know Martin Luther King and love his work and we're grateful for all that he was doing then through me and Jimmy Carter.
Powerful.
And so it's gonna be all right. You know that old spiritual, I got a feeling everything's gonna be all right. It's gonna be all right.
It is going to be all right. Ambassador Young, thank you so much. Thank you for being so gracious and just giving us your vantage point. It's so important, and every time I can spend time with you, it's such a blessing, and I'm so grateful.
Well, thank you. And you covering my territory. Your stations cover all the territory I grew up in.
That's right.
And did most of my work in.
Right. So we welcome you home.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And may God continue to bless the work of your hands.
Thank you. And God bless you also.
Indeed. Thank you so much.